We are so fragile. Advertising lies that are whiter than yours. We are so fragile. They could give us a war just to keep us amused. We are so fragile. We'll like to stay here inside and see it's all we've done. We are so fragile. Just pretend I'll never try. I'll leave it up to you.
Do you remember much about the John Peel session that you did, which was kind of the start of the Pleasure Principle sessions, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, we did two, and they've kind of blurred a bit. I think I can't even remember one, but I'm probably remembering all of it, you know. So bits and pieces, yeah. I remember realising how important it was and how cool it was to be doing it, and it felt like especially the first one, I suppose, because nothing had happened at all. It felt like a real opportunity, and just being asked to do it, to be on the radio, it felt like a huge step forward to anything that had happened before, and being really worried about wanting it to sound just right, and being quite stressed about the whole thing to understand. But it was good experience. The thing about John Peel sessions is you only had a few hours to do it, so it wasn't as if you spent days in the studio sort of perfecting, which is one of the things that was slightly sort of frustrating about it. Really, you could spend, well, I say weeks, but in those days it was still only days. Yeah. But you spend a fair amount of time in the studio, getting your songs as good as you could, and then you got this chance to play them on the radio, and you had like 3 hours or something to do all 3 songs. It was all this mad rush to try to recreate what you'd done in the studio. So it was quite stressful, and there wasn't a lot of time. There wasn't any sort of experimenting went on. You just went in there and did your best to recreate your studio version as quickly and as efficiently as possible. It's just so getting the vocal done quickly was really important. Everyone had to do their parts really quickly because you just didn't have time for doing lots and lots of overdubs. So, but again, that added a certain sort of excitement to it. But apart from that, there's not that much to say about Peel sessions. The studio you did them in was old-fashioned and basic and made of Al. The people that you worked with, although they were very friendly, had every week they would have sort of upstart little bands coming through, that most of which never came to anything anyway. So they probably just sort of used to churning this stuff out, and then I'd come along with this weird little electronics.
Were you dressed up?
Well, I've seen photographs where I'm wearing jeans with turn-ups, so obviously not. No.
I don't remember seeing pictures of the second session.
I can't remember the second one, but certainly the first one.
Yeah.
No, I still had the same old clothes on I had before. Because I wasn't famous then. I didn't have any money or anything.
Do you remember the first time that you actually rehearsed with Cedric and everyone? How you discovered them?
I can remember Cedric's audition. Yeah, we was auditioning drummers downstairs at one of the biggest banquet shops, Fulham, I think it was. And Gerald was there to oversee it, because he would be able to spot a good drummer from a not so good one, which I probably wouldn't. And Cedric stood out. Out of the few people, not many people turned up actually. I think I had 4 or 5, I can't remember for sure. But one bloke complained because it was too difficult.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, we was asking to play Down in the Park and Our Friends Electric, and he said it's too complicated.
Yeah.
God, that's just ridiculous. And then one bloke turned up, and he still had he was a builder, and he had these sort of big boots on with bits of concrete stuck in them and things. And he said, I can't play because I've got my boots on. Why'd you come in them then? It's a load of usual sort of nonsense really when people turn up for auditions, and then Cedric came in and just blitzed it.
Yeah.
You know, could do everything really easily and sounded brilliant, and you know, just straight off was really, really good. So that was a no contest, really.
I mean, was there ever any point where you thought, I mean, you were absolutely sure that you wanted a drummer? There was never, even though you were switching to electronic music, you didn't think about using drum machines more or trying to
No,
get
not
into
really. Because my thing with electronics had always been to, generally speaking, actually, to add them to conventional lineup. I liked conventional lineups. I like guitars and bass and drums and things like that. So I didn't want to replace it. I just wanted to add to it. I thought it would add. I thought electronic music would add a new layer to what there'd been before, which I was perfectly happy with. You know, didn't have a problem with that. So no, I wanted a band, and I wanted it to be as live as possible. And strangely, the Pleasure Principle was the one album I ever made where I deliberately didn't have guitars on it, because I was trying to prove a point, really. You know, I actually don't think I did it very well, to be honest. But you know, trying to prove the point that you could have full-blown, you know, fully developed music, and you didn't have to have a guitar. You didn't have to, you know, follow this sort of conventional route of putting music together, which kind of went against what I was aiming for in general, as I say. And it's the only time I ever did it, and I tend to think, sort of looking back on it, that it was just a bit pointless, really. Yeah.
See, I love the starkness to it because it doesn't have guitars. It makes you hear things in a slightly different way, I suppose. Or
Well, it forces you to do different things. You know, there are certain things, you get to a certain point in a song where a guitar comes into its own and has, you know, a very useful function. So if you don't have one, you've got to find other ways of getting around that problem. And from a production point of view, you know, what do you do to add that element of power, whatever it might be that the guitar is doing? So it sort of encourages you to think a little bit differently, I suppose. But I don't think it's such a, it seems such a big thing at the time. It seemed like a really important point to make. But looking back on it, I don't see it as being particularly useful, really. All I did was cut myself off from some good noises.
yeah, you see, I don't know, because I mean, I think one of the reasons why, which is sort of related to Cedric as well, why so many people in America and the hip hop thing is very connected to Pleasure Principle, is partly that it's not, whereas Replica still has a lot of guitars and is kind of, as you say, it's kind of a band thing with the sort of chug 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 punky guitars on there.
Yeah.
You know, Pleasure Principle doesn't have any of that, and it seems to have therefore meant something to a whole other group of people who don't reference actually replicas that much. You know, people like Bambata and all the samples and the covers have tended to be things like films, haven't they, or metal.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's part of it. It's that sort of starkness with the rhythm is something that actually connects with their interest in music or their areas of music.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly, there's a lot more interest in it from a sampling point of view, by far, than there ever has been for Replicas. Not that Replicas doesn't have any, but you know, there's a huge imbalance between the two of them. So yeah, Pleasure Principle seems to have something about it that those particular people like. There's no doubt about it that not having guitars on it, it gave it a sound,
Yeah.
which it definitely would not have had if it had guitars on it. So if you like that sort of thing, then it was a good move.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, for me, thinking back, looking back on it, I shouldn't. It's not that I'm against what we did, really, because you know, I've ended up with an album which has, you know, got its sort of long-term fans, really, and that's a cool thing. But I just think it's a kind of a flawed idea, really, to deliberately not have certain things in the record. Say, I'm not going to use that, and I'm not going to use that. If it makes you come up with other ideas in a really creative way, so that, you know, there's a really sort of creative approach to getting around those particular self-made problems, then I would feel more satisfied with it, I think. But I'm not entirely sure I got away with it from that point of view. And you know, we did get around not having a guitar by doing other things, but personally, I wouldn't sort of stand up and say it was all highly creative and it really, really worked and it sort of forged a different sort of direction musically. I don't think about that. You know, I just think it hasn't got guitars on it, really, and maybe it should have had.
I think Cedric has said in the past that you had quite a different sort of interesting approach to how you wanted him to play as well. So although he, you know, you wanted drums, you wanted a rock drummer involved, it was very much like kind of more hypnotic kind of grooves going around.
Yeah, I don't really like all this, you know, cymbals and ride cymbals and all that sort of stuff. Never really have been a big fan of that sort of drumming. So I wanted something which was much more, not robotic, I hate that expression, but yeah, much more just fixed groove running through it. So which is more drum machine like, I suppose, but with the input of a real player and the feel of a real player and that variation that a real player would put into it. You know, you will do little feels that you're not expecting. I like that side of it, but I was never really a big rock drummer, simple sort of man. I just don't think it suited the sort of music that I was making. It wouldn't have been appropriate at all. When Cedric was really good at giving me just what I wanted.
So you already knew by the time you found Cedric what kind of thing you wanted him to do?
It was
a drummer.
It was just a constantly evolving thing, really.
Right.
You know, one day I'd sort of figure out a particular style, if you like, of how I would want the drums. Another day I'd figure out a particular style for bass or whatever, or the sort of sounds or effects I wanted on drums. And it really was a case of every time I went in the studio, I would learn a bit more, and it would help to fine tune, if you like, what I was aiming for. I mean, it was new to all of us, really, and I think for everyone, especially me, it was just a little voyage of discovery every time you went in, because it wasn't as if we had all this equipment at home. We were sitting at home for days and days just working with it. We didn't have it at home. We couldn't afford it, so it'd only be when we got into a studio that we could work with it, and you know, you had those day or 2 days, whatever it might be, while you had it, to learn how it all worked. You know, what did these knobs and dials do, and what did that switch do, and it was all really concentrated, as well as trying to record the things you've gone in there for in the first place. So it was really exciting, and it really did feel as if you were doing something new, but you was always aware of that you didn't really know what you were doing, and so you were just figuring things out as you went along, for that particular song or for that particular track almost. So as each album come along in those early days, they were quite different to the one before, because you'd learned so much in that short space of time. But after when you've done a lot, the differences between them from a production point of view become sort of much harder to gauge, really, because there aren't these great big leaps of knowledge and understanding as there were when we first started. We say we did first three albums in 12 months, and you know, you're going to learn a lot when you spend that amount of time in the studio when you knew absolutely nothing to start with.